The clatter of broken glass echoed through the restaurant, cutting through the soft hum of background chatter like a thunderclap. Every head in the room turned, eyes wide, as a towering man in a sharply tailored navy suit leaned over the counter, his face twisted in fury. "What do you mean you messed up my order?" he barked, his voice booming enough to silence the piano playing in the corner. The woman behind the counter, petite and trembling, tried to steady the tray of drinks she held. Her hands shook, betraying the panic rising in her chest. I'm so sorry, sir. I can fix it immediately," she stammered, her voice barely audible over the tense murmurs of the restaurant crowd. But the man, tall, broad-shouldered, and radiating authority, wasn't listening. He stepped closer, a glint of menace in his eyes. "No, no, I want this fixed now," he snarled, pointing at the tray with a perfectly manicured finger. The tip of his shiny black shoe nudged the edge of the counter, sending a glass of sparkling water tumbling toward the floor. It shattered with a sharp crash, the shards scattering like tiny daggers across the polished wood. Everyone froze. Patrons looked at each other, unsure whether to intervene. The air felt heavier, tense enough to choke on. The woman swallowed hard, gripping the edge of the counter to steady herself. Her name was Emily, and her heart raced like a drum in a war zone. She had never felt so small, so powerless. And yet something inside her told her she couldn't show fear. "I said fix it," the man growled again. His tone carried the weight of someone used to having the world bend to his command. He leaned even closer, his nose almost brushing hers, and the faint scent of expensive cologne mixed with the stench of arrogance filled her senses. Emily's lips trembled. She wanted to shout for help, but knew that no one would dare step in. This man wasn't just rude, he was dangerous. There was a palpable sense of threat, a simmering danger in his rigid stance and the tight curl of his fists. She could see it in the subtle way he flexed his hand, a movement almost too controlled to be natural. He had that look, one that warned, "I am capable of anything," and then, as if the universe itself had frozen in disbelief, the man's hand shot under the counter. A glimmer of metal caught the low light. He had a weapon. Emily's eyes widened, terror rooting her to the spot. Her mind raced, but her body froze. The bustling restaurant, filled with chatter and clinking cutlery just moments ago, became a slow-motion scene of horror. Every fork raised, every whispered word, every uncertain glance of the patrons felt like it was part of a nightmare she couldn't wake from. Somewhere behind her, the soft tinkle of the piano stopped. The entire room had noticed the shift. A waiter froze mid-step, a glass in hand, eyes darting between the man and Emily. And all Emily could think was, "I need help. I can't do this alone." Then, almost imperceptibly, she remembered the training she had, something nobody around her knew. Her fingers moved subtly, forming shapes in the air, almost like she was performing an invisible dance. The motion was precise, urgent. "Help me, he has a weapon." It was a secret code she had shared with her friend and coworker, a sign language system designed for emergencies. And across the room, barely noticeable, the waitress at the opposite end of the bar caught it. She froze, eyes locking on Emily's frantic gestures. In that instant, the signal was clear, undeniable. Something was wrong. The man in the navy suit, oblivious to the silent communication unfolding, continued to berate Emily. "Do you think this is a game?" he shouted, his face flushing with anger. "I don't pay good money to be treated like I'm invisible." Emily's knees threatened to buckle under the weight of fear. She could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears, loud enough that she feared the man might hear it too. Sweat beaded at her hairline, trickling down her temple, and her hands felt clammy as she clutched the counter for balance. The crowd around them had split into two camps. Some stared, frozen and horrified, while others whispered cruelly, fueled by the spectacle. A few daring individuals murmured comments under their breath. "Typical Karen behavior," one said. "She should just take it," muttered another. No one moved to intervene. The bystander effect, amplified by the man's sheer intimidation, rendered the room silent, powerless. Emily swallowed a sob and tried to steady herself. She glanced at the waitress who had seen the signal. Their eyes met, and in that fleeting connection, Emily felt a spark of hope. Someone understood. Someone could act. She couldn't speak. If she tried, the man might notice, and panic could turn into violence. But she could communicate. She had to communicate. The man, growing increasingly impatient, slammed his fist on the counter. The sharp bang echoed like a gunshot. "Enough! Fix it now or you're fired!" A hush fell over the restaurant. Even the regular chatter of diners seemed to pause, like the world itself was holding its breath. Emily's stomach knotted with dread. Losing her job, humiliating herself in public, it was one thing, but the glint of that weapon made every threat tangible. Every scenario her mind conjured was darker than the last. And then came the moment that would change everything. The man reached out again, more forceful this time, knocking a glass of juice to the floor. Its contents spilled like molten gold, staining the polished wood. "You're worthless," he spat, leaning in closer, his face inches from hers. "Do you hear me? Worthless." The cruel words pierced deeper than any knife. Emily felt heat rise to her cheeks, a mix of fear and humiliation that made her stomach twist. Patrons shifted uncomfortably in their seats, some averting their eyes, unwilling to witness the abuse, while others leaned forward, almost morbidly fascinated by the spectacle. But in that exact moment, the hidden truth hovered like a storm cloud just beyond the man's awareness. He had no idea who Emily really was, no idea who was watching, and no idea that the smallest, quietest gesture of her hand might summon help far beyond what anyone in this restaurant could imagine. Emily's eyes, filled with a mix of desperation and determination, darted toward the exit, toward a person who could make the nightmare stop. But then she froze. A realization hit her. If she didn't act carefully, this could escalate beyond control. One wrong move and the consequences would be catastrophic. She clenched her jaw and subtly shifted her hands, forming the next set of signs, silent but potent. Every second stretched into an eternity, the tension in the room palpable, almost tangible. The man's face twisted further, anger morphing into frustration as his control over the situation began to slip, though he didn't yet know why. And then the unexpected happened. Across the restaurant, the quiet observer, a young man in a crisp uniform, stood up. He hadn't been paying attention, or so it seemed. But in reality, he had been watching Emily's subtle signals the entire time. His eyes narrowed, calculating, a sense of urgency gripping his every movement. The man in the suit finally noticed the connection, sensing the shift in energy. "What are you looking at?" he barked at no one in particular, turning sharply toward the waiter. But by then, it was too late. The silent communication had already been noticed. The first spark of intervention had begun. Emily's pulse raced, every fiber of her being alert to the danger surrounding her. Her mind screamed, "Hold on, help is coming, don't give up now." The weapon glinted once more under the restaurant lights, a menacing reminder of the peril she faced. And then, just as the man reached for her shoulder, about to escalate the confrontation further, a hush swept over the room. Patrons froze mid-motion, their eyes widening. Something shifted in the energy of the space, though no one could yet articulate why. Emily felt it too, a subtle, electrifying shift that promised the impossible, salvation. But it was tempered with uncertainty. Would the intervention come in time? Would the weapon be taken out of play before disaster struck? Her chest heaved, heart pounding like a jackhammer, sweat slicking her palms. The man's arrogance blinded him to what was about to unfold. He had no idea that the quiet, trembling woman he was humiliating held a secret that once revealed would stun the room, upend every assumption, and force him to confront a reality he could never have anticipated. Emily's eyes met the young man's again. The silent exchange was clear, urgent. Now is the moment. Question of the day: have you ever been judged unfairly or humiliated in public? How did it feel to be powerless in that moment? Share your story in the comments below and let us know where you're watching from. But before we see how this ends, let's go back to where this story truly began. The morning sun spilled gently over downtown Chicago, casting golden streaks across the towering glass facades of the city's skyscrapers. Traffic hummed in a distant rhythm, punctuated by the occasional blare of a taxi horn. But inside a modest apartment on the third floor of a red-brick building on Wabash Avenue, a very different kind of morning was unfolding. Emily Parker was already awake, sitting cross-legged on the small rug in her living room, her laptop balanced precariously on her knees. Her apartment was humble but cozy, white walls decorated with a few framed photographs, a small bookshelf overflowing with dog-eared novels, and a potted fern that clung desperately to life in the corner by the window. The smell of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the faint aroma of leftover pancakes from the night before. At 27, Emily's life had never been easy. She worked 2 jobs. By day, she was an administrative assistant at a local nonprofit that helped disabled children, and by night, she waited tables at a trendy downtown restaurant to make ends meet. Most of her friends in college had gone on to corporate careers or advanced degrees. She, on the other hand, had to navigate the messy balance between survival and ambition. Yet there was a quiet resilience in her that few could understand. Emily's hands bore faint calluses from long hours of work, and her smile carried a warmth that seemed almost defiant in the face of hardship. Despite the fatigue etched into her face, there was a brightness in her eyes, a spark that refused to dim no matter how many challenges life threw at her. Today, however, was unlike any other. Today mattered. She shut her laptop with a soft click, standing to stretch. Her phone buzzed on the counter, displaying a text message from her younger brother, Josh. "Good luck today, Em. You got this." A soft smile tugged at her lips, but there was a knot in her stomach. The stakes were higher than usual. Her night shift at the restaurant would put her directly in the path of a dangerous encounter she couldn't yet predict. But before that, she had to handle her other pressing responsibility. Emily's life had always been about responsibility. Since she was 16, she had helped care for her younger brother after their parents passed away in a car accident. She had taken every odd job, every shift, every opportunity to keep a roof over their heads. College had been a distant dream, barely achieved through scholarships and part-time work. She had sacrificed luxuries she would never miss so that Josh could grow up safe, fed, and educated. Her morning routine was simple but rigid. She prepared breakfast, made sure Josh had everything for school, and reviewed her to-do list for the day. Today's list was longer than usual. One of the children at the non-profit was scheduled for a critical therapy session, and she had to ensure the paperwork was processed correctly. Then came her evening shift at the restaurant, a job she tolerated not because of passion, but because it paid more than her day job. As she pulled on her uniform, plain black slacks and a fitted shirt, she caught herself in the mirror. Her brown hair was tied back in a neat ponytail, and her hands, though tired, were steady. She took a deep breath. "You've got this," she whispered, more to calm herself than to convince anyone else. Emily's co-workers at the restaurant had always admired her dedication, even if they didn't fully understand the weight she carried. She was known for her kindness, always tipping generously, going the extra mile for customers, and offering a warm smile even on the busiest nights. But kindness, she had learned, could sometimes make you a target. People often mistook politeness for weakness, and Emily had felt the sting of that many times before. Despite her quiet strength, Emily carried a secret, a side of her life that few knew. She had taken sign language classes in college, partly as a personal interest, partly as a tool to help communicate with clients at the non-profit who were hearing impaired. Over time, her proficiency had grown, and she had developed subtle, quick signals she could use in emergencies, an unspoken language designed to alert trusted people when she was in danger. It had never been used outside practice scenarios, until now. That secret skill was about to be tested in a way she never imagined. Her breakfast was simple, oatmeal with a spoonful of peanut butter, and as she ate, she checked the clock. Every minute felt like a countdown. Today, the restaurant was hosting a VIP event. One of the city's most influential CEOs, someone who had built a reputation for ruthless business tactics, would be dining there. Emily knew about him. Everyone in downtown Chicago knew the name, Richard Lawson. Tall, impeccably dressed, a man whose wealth and influence were only matched by his arrogance. To make matters more stressful, she had been assigned to serve Lawson's table that evening. Normally, she would have requested a different shift, but tonight was different. Josh's school fees were due, and a few extra hours at the restaurant meant she could cover the remaining balance without borrowing money. Every detail mattered. Every decision could tip the delicate balance of her life. By mid-afternoon, Emily left her apartment, locking the door behind her. The streets buzzed with activity, children rushing home from school, business people striding along the sidewalks with coffee in hand, construction crews clanging in the distance. She walked with purpose, the heels of her shoes clicking against the pavement, each step a reminder that she was on the brink of something significant. She arrived at the non-profit first, ensuring the morning's tasks were completed. Filing papers, making phone calls, double-checking schedules. These were small things, but in Emily's life, small things often carried enormous consequences. A missed deadline could mean lost funding or delayed therapy for one of the children she cared for. Her attention to detail wasn't just diligence. It was an act of love, a shield for the vulnerable lives dependent on her. By late afternoon, she made her way to the restaurant. The evening air had cooled, the city lights flickering to life as the sun dipped below the horizon. The building loomed ahead, a chic, modern establishment with polished chrome accents and floor-to-ceiling windows. Inside, the restaurant exuded opulence, soft amber lighting, crystal chandeliers, and tables dressed in crisp white linen. This was the world of wealth and power, a stark contrast to the modest life Emily led. She took a deep breath at the entrance, steadying herself. Her uniform was neat, her hair pulled back, and her demeanor professional. But under the composed exterior, nerves churned like a storm. She knew that one mistake tonight could not only humiliate her but potentially jeopardize her livelihood. As she stepped behind the counter to clock in, her manager, a burly man named Tony, greeted her with a nod. "Big night tonight, Em. Table 10, Lawson, don't mess it up," he said with a half-smile. There was no malice, only the blunt practicality of someone who understood the stakes. Emily nodded, her mind already running through the checklist. Approach politely, keep the orders accurate, anticipate needs before they're requested, remain calm under pressure. She reminded herself that this wasn't just about serving drinks or clearing plates. It was about survival, about maintaining dignity under scrutiny. It wasn't lost on Emily that the stakes were about more than just money. The VIP table represented the very pressures that life had placed upon her. Every patron with wealth and influence seemed to carry an invisible power over people like her, those who worked tirelessly yet remained unseen, unrecognized, and underappreciated. She carried herself with quiet confidence as she approached the table. Richard Lawson, she learned as she stepped closer, had already arrived. Even from a distance, his presence was commanding. Tall, with sharp features and an aura of untouchable authority, he examined the menu with the kind of scrutiny that made Emily's heart skip a beat. This was a man accustomed to being obeyed without question, a man who had never been denied anything in his life. Emily knelt slightly to take the first round of drink orders, her voice polite but steady. "Good evening, Mr. Lawson. May I start you with a drink?" Lawson's gaze lifted, and she felt the weight of it immediately. Sharp, discerning, almost predatory, he didn't smile. Instead, his lips curved ever so slightly in a way that promised critique, scrutiny, and the unmistakable sting of judgment. "I expect perfection tonight," he said in a tone that brooked no argument. "Mistakes are unacceptable." Emily nodded, inwardly bracing herself, every fiber of her being focused on precision, on anticipating every need before it was voiced. She didn't just serve, she strategized, planning every step like a chess player predicting an opponent's moves. She knew that in this environment, excellence wasn't just appreciated, it was survival. Little did she know, the challenges of tonight would push her far beyond routine precision. The arrogance, cruelty, and danger she would soon face were unprecedented in her career. And yet Emily's innate kindness, intelligence, and resilience would equip her to navigate this storm in ways that nobody, not even Lawson, could predict. By the time the first round of orders was delivered, Emily had already been tested. A minor error in the drink mix had caused Lawson to frown, and a subtle reprimand had brushed past her ears like a sting. She kept her calm, apologizing subtly, correcting the mistake immediately. Each action was deliberate, controlled, measured. But even as she maintained composure, a quiet awareness lingered beneath the surface. Emily knew that tonight this table, this man, represented more than a job or a paycheck. It represented a challenge to her integrity, her patience, and her ability to protect herself while performing flawlessly under pressure. She had no idea that the true danger would not come from a misplaced order or a spilled drink. It would come from the man himself. And that danger, looming just hours away, would ignite a chain of events that would test Emily in ways she could never have imagined. Leading her to the moment we saw in the opening scene, standing at the counter with a man wielding a weapon, the entire restaurant as witness, and only her quick thinking and secret skill capable of saving her. The restaurant's front doors chimed as Emily stepped inside, the soft bell ringing a note of both routine and foreboding. The polished marble floors reflected the low, amber lighting, and the murmur of conversations blended with the clink of glasses and the faint strains of a piano in the corner. She exhaled slowly, trying to steady her pulse. Every shift required focus, but tonight focus alone would not be enough. The host, a young man named Derek, nodded at her as she passed. "Table 10, Mr. Lawson," he said softly, gesturing toward the VIP corner. Emily's stomach tightened. She had seen the corner before, a small, semi-private enclave with velvet drapes, a chandelier casting soft light over the crisp white tablecloths. Everything about it screamed power, influence, and intimidation. Emily approached the table with her usual polite confidence, but her mind was alert to every detail: the spacing of the chairs, the position of the glassware, the posture of the diners. Richard Lawson was already seated, reviewing a menu with the kind of precision that suggested he could scrutinize every detail in life and find it lacking. "Good evening, Mr. Lawson," Emily said, her voice steady and professional. "I'm Emily, and I'll be taking care of you tonight. May I start you with a drink?" Lawson's sharp gaze lifted from the menu, piercing her like a dagger. He had that rare talent of making someone feel exposed without a word. "Water, sparkling." "I don't have time for mistakes," he said, his voice cool, measured, but carrying the unmistakable edge of arrogance. "Yes, sir. Sparkling water, right away," Emily replied, bowing her head slightly in acknowledgement. She moved with the precision of someone who knew every second mattered, every motion would be judged, and any misstep could have consequences far beyond embarrassment. As she poured the water, she caught glimpses of Lawson's entourage, two men in dark suits seated at the far end of the table, quietly observing, their presence amplifying the pressure. The air felt thicker, heavier, as if the weight of the entire city had been condensed into this one room. Emily approached the table again, careful not to spill a drop. "Here you are, sir," she said, placing the glass with a soft clink in front of him. "May I take your order now?" Lawson's gaze sharpened, and he leaned back slightly in his chair, studying her. "You look nervous," he said, a faint sneer tugging at his lips. "Do you always act this timid?" Emily's hands trembled slightly, not from fear but from the awareness of his scrutiny. I assure you, sir, I take pride in providing excellent service," she said, her voice firm but respectful. He laughed, a low, derisive sound that carried across the table. "Pride, service. Those are words people like you use to justify mediocrity. Don't waste my time with excuses." Emily felt a blush creep up her neck. Her pulse quickened, and for a fleeting moment she doubted herself, but she steadied her breathing. Years of surviving hostile environments had taught her one thing: composure is power. If she faltered, she could lose everything. As she took the order, Lawson continued, his words cutting like fine steel. "Do you know why people like me succeed? Because we don't tolerate incompetence. We demand excellence, and yet here you are, fumbling over simple tasks." He gestured vaguely toward the table, emphasizing her presence. "Tell me, do you understand what real work looks like?" Emily felt the sting of humiliation, but refused to let it show. "Yes, sir," she replied quietly, placing her pen to the notepad with deliberate care. "I take my work seriously and strive to meet every expectation." The man's eyes narrowed, and he leaned forward slightly, his tone now edged with mockery. "Strive? That's amusing. Strive doesn't pay the bills, does it? Strive doesn't earn respect. Strive doesn't make anyone care about your failures." Emily's hands clenched around her notepad. She felt the weight of every patron's gaze, the judgment, the quiet whispers of amusement. Some of the diners laughed softly, others averted their eyes, uncomfortable with the cruelty but unwilling to intervene. She was utterly isolated, a small figure under the spotlight of Richard Lawson's contempt. As she walked away to relay the order to the kitchen, she could feel his eyes on her back, the silent accusation heavy as lead. The kitchen staff exchanged uneasy glances. This was a man who intimidated everyone in his path, whose arrogance demanded obedience, and whose temper promised disaster at the slightest provocation. Moments later, Emily returned with the first course. As she set the plates down, a fork slid slightly on the tablecloth, catching Lawson's attention. He leaned back in his chair, a faint smirk playing on his lips. "Clumsy, always clumsy," he said. "Do you ever get anything right?" Emily's lips pressed into a thin line. She kept her eyes on the plates, her voice calm. "I apologize, sir. I'll be more careful." His smirk widened. "Careful? You're never careful enough. I could fire you for incompetence right now and find someone who actually knows what they're doing. But I won't. I'm feeling generous tonight. Consider that a gift." A hush fell over the table. Even the entourage stiffened, sensing the cruel game unfolding. Emily's chest tightened, her stomach churned. Every word from Lawson was designed to humiliate, to assert dominance, to break her composure. And then the unthinkable happened. As Emily reached for the wine bottle to pour, she accidentally nudged it slightly. It wobbled, threatening to spill. Lawson's face contorted in fury. "You incompetent fool!" he shouted, standing abruptly. The chair scraped loudly against the floor. "Do you understand the concept of service? Do you know what it means to serve someone with excellence?" Emily froze, the bottle trembling in her hand. She could feel the weight of his rage pressing down on her, suffocating. Her ears rang with the intensity of the public humiliation, her face burning as everyone in the restaurant turned to watch the spectacle unfold. "Sir, please, it was an accident," she began, but he cut her off. Accident? There are no accidents in my world. Everything is deliberate. Every action has a consequence. And you, he gestured broadly at her, are failing spectacularly. Emily's mind raced. She had prepared for rude patrons, for difficult tables, for subtle snubs, but not this. Not a direct attack on her competence in front of the entire room with the palpable threat of physical escalation looming. Her heart hammered in her chest. She took a step back, nearly colliding with the edge of the counter. Every muscle in her body tensed as the sheer force of his presence bore down on her. And then she noticed it, the subtle, deadly glint of a weapon tucked partially under his jacket. Panic surged through her veins. Her throat went dry. But something inside her clicked. A memory of her sign language training, the emergency gestures she had perfected but never used. She couldn't call out. Her voice would only escalate the situation. She needed a silent signal, a plea for help that only someone trained to notice would understand. Emily's fingers moved subtly, almost imperceptibly, forming the prearranged signs. Help me. He has a weapon. Across the room, the waitress stationed near the bar, who had been observing quietly, caught the signals. Her eyes widened, understanding instantly. She nodded subtly, signaling that she had noticed that help could be coordinated. Lawson, oblivious to the silent communication unfolding, continued to berate Emily. Do you think you're clever? Do you think flattery and charm will cover up your incompetence? Emily kept her gaze steady, refusing to shrink, refusing to break. But inside, she was calculating, plotting every subtle movement, every gesture, every glance that might buy her a second of time, a chance for intervention. The restaurant felt like a pressure cooker. Patrons froze mid-conversation, forks poised in mid-air, glasses trembling on the tables. The piano had gone silent, the low hum of activity replaced by the palpable tension of a room on the brink. Lawson's voice rose again, booming across the floor. I've never met someone so utterly useless. You should be embarrassed to show your face in public. Emily's jaw tightened. She could feel tears welling, the humiliation burning hotter than fear. And yet somewhere beneath the layers of shame and panic, a spark of determination flickered. She would not be broken. She would survive. At that moment across the room, the silent observer, the young man in uniform, stood up. He had been watching Emily's signals all along, and now he was ready. Every movement, every glance, every subtle cue had led to this instant. He moved toward the VIP table, calm but deliberate, a storm contained within his composed exterior. Lawson, sensing the shift in energy, frowned, unaware of the danger closing in. What are you? And that's when everything changed. Time seemed to slow. Every second stretched endlessly as Emily's eyes locked with the young man moving toward the table. His steps were calm but deliberate, carrying authority, urgency, and precision. The murmurs of the restaurant seemed to fade into background noise, leaving only the pounding of Emily's heart and the low, menacing hum of Lawson's anger. Richard Lawson, towering over her with a presence that demanded obedience, finally noticed the movement. What are you doing? He barked, his tone slicing across the room like a whip. Emily took a small, deliberate step back, her hands subtly signaling again. Now. Across the restaurant, the young man nodded to the bar waitress who had caught Emily's first signal. She immediately grabbed her phone and pressed a discreet button under the counter, a silent alert system she and Emily had agreed upon for emergencies. In an instant, staff members near the entrance and kitchen began moving into positions, ready to assist without escalating the situation prematurely. Lawson's frown deepened, sensing that something was amiss. Do you all see this incompetence? He shouted at the gathering crowd. This woman is dangerous. Emily's pulse raced. She forced herself to remain composed even as sweat slicked her palms and her legs trembled. She had one shot, one subtle move that could change the course of the encounter. She couldn't make a sound. Her survival depended on silence, on precision, on the perfect execution of her plan. Then the young man reached the table. With quiet authority, he placed a hand firmly on Lawson's shoulder. The room froze. Patrons and staff alike stared, mouths slightly agape. Lawson spun around, eyes blazing with fury. Who the hell are you? He demanded. Get your hands off me. The young man didn't flinch. He leaned in, lowering his voice so only Lawson could hear, yet firm enough that it carried an unspoken threat. Sir, step away from her, now. Emily's eyes widened. There was a calm in his demeanor, a confidence that disarmed even the most powerful people. He wasn't just anyone. There was authority in his posture, a subtle aura of control that commanded attention without shouting. Lawson recoiled, momentarily surprised. Step away. Who are you two? Before he could finish, Emily made her move. With careful precision, she slid her hands under the counter, retrieving a small but powerful panic alarm she always carried in her apron pocket. Pressing it triggered a soft but distinct alert, signaling security and local law enforcement. The room held its breath as the faint buzz spread through the building, the tiny device doing what words could not. It gave Emily a lifeline. Lawson's eyes narrowed as he realized something had shifted. "What is this?" he barked, but the distraction was enough. The young man subtly signaled Emily, and she carefully stepped back, moving toward a safer position while maintaining eye contact with Lawson. Every movement was deliberate, controlled, but silent, a dance of survival. And then it happened, the revelation. From across the restaurant, the bar door swung open, and a woman appeared, a figure commanding attention without even trying. She was tall, poised, and impeccably dressed, with a presence that immediately drew every eye in the room. "Richard Lawson," she said, her voice clear, powerful, and authoritative. Lawson turned, confusion flickering across his face. What is this?" he stammered. The woman stepped forward, her gaze sweeping the room. She reached Emily first, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Emily Parker," she said with warmth yet unmistakable authority. "This is my daughter." The room seemed to tilt on its axis. Whispers erupted like wildfire, patrons gawked, the staff froze mid-motion. Emily's heart hammered so hard she thought it might shatter her ribs. Her mother, or rather the CEO of the very company Lawson had dealings with, was here, and she knew exactly who Lawson was. Lawson's jaw dropped. "Your daughter," he repeated, pale and trembling now. His authoritative composure crumbled as the realization hit him like a lightning bolt. The woman's presence carried the weight of power, influence, and justice, and he could feel it bearing down on him. Emily's mother, the CEO, didn't need to shout. Her authority radiated effortlessly. "I see my daughter has been treated terribly tonight," she said calmly, almost gently, yet with an edge that left no room for argument. "And you," she said, turning sharply to Lawson, "have crossed a line that cannot be ignored." Lawson's face drained of color. His hands shook as he realized that the man he had mocked, humiliated, and threatened was connected to a level of influence he had never imagined. He stammered, I didn't know." "Of course you didn't," Emily's mother said, her tone sharp but controlled. "Because if you had, you would have treated her with respect. You would have known that the woman you humiliated tonight is not just a server. She is my daughter, and she has the same values, integrity, and intelligence that I've instilled in her. And you," she gestured at Lawson, who now appeared smaller than any employee he had ever dominated, "you are beneath contempt." The room went silent. The tension, thick moments ago with fear and intimidation, dissolved into stunned disbelief. Patrons and staff alike felt the shift instantly. The arrogant, cruel figure who had loomed over Emily now looked like a child caught in a lie. Emily took a shaky breath, the adrenaline still coursing through her. She felt relief wash over her, mingled with lingering fear. "Mom," she whispered, voice barely audible, "thank you." Her mother nodded, a silent acknowledgement. Then she turned back to Lawson, eyes blazing. "You will apologize, and more importantly, you will face the consequences of your actions. Public humiliation, threats, and intimidation have no place here or anywhere else." Lawson's voice faltered. He tried to maintain authority, but failed miserably. I didn't mean." "You meant exactly what you did," Emily's mother interrupted. "And now the world will know who you truly are. Consider this a lesson you won't forget." At that moment, the young man who had reached Emily earlier stepped forward. He removed his jacket slightly, revealing a security badge clipped discreetly to his belt. "Sir, I'm calling the authorities now," he said calmly. "Your weapon is secured, and you are no longer a threat." Lawson's face went pale, his bravado evaporating completely. Every patron, every employee, every witness could see the truth. The man who had terrorized Emily for minutes that felt like hours was powerless. Every insult, every threat, every humiliation had been for nothing. Emily's mother smiled slightly, a mixture of pride and relief. "Emily," she said softly, "you stayed calm, you stayed smart, you survived, and now justice will be done." The crowd erupted in quiet murmurs of astonishment. Some patrons applauded softly, others simply stared, unable to process the sudden reversal of fortune. The narrative of the evening had been flipped entirely. The hero, previously humiliated, was now vindicated. The villain, once untouchable, was exposed. Lawson's shoulders slumped. The arrogance that had defined him moments ago had evaporated into shock, shame, and fear. The room no longer respected him, they pitied him. And that perhaps was the cruelest punishment of all. Emily exhaled, her body trembling with relief. The tension that had constricted her chest like iron finally eased. She glanced at her mother and the young man who had intervened. She realized with a mix of awe and gratitude that she had survived not just because of her own preparation, but because of the unseen network she had quietly relied on, her skill, her mother's influence, and the courage of others willing to act. Lawson, still pale, mumbled an apology that sounded hollow even to himself. Emily's mother shook her head, a faint smile on her lips. "It's not enough," she said, "but it's a start." And in that moment, Emily understood something profound. Courage and integrity, even in the face of overwhelming power, could not only protect her but could also reveal the truth in the most impossible situations. She had been judged, humiliated, and threatened, but she had emerged stronger, wiser, and more respected than ever. The twist had been complete. The room, once dominated by fear and cruelty, now reverberated with stunned silence, admiration, and respect. The villain had been unmasked, and the hero, quietly brave and exceptionally skilled, had not just survived, she had triumphed. The room remained silent, the weight of the revelation still hanging heavily in the air. Richard Lawson sat slumped in his chair, the arrogance that had defined him moments ago completely stripped away. His entourage, normally the picture of composed authority, shifted uneasily. Their leader, once untouchable, unflinching, had been exposed for exactly what he was, a man who mistook cruelty for power. Emily's mother, Charlotte Parker, took a slow, deliberate step closer. Every eye in the restaurant followed her, recognizing immediately that she was the one who set the tone now. "Richard," she said, her voice calm but cutting, "you will not leave here without facing the consequences of your actions tonight." Lawson's lips trembled. He tried to regain some semblance of control. I didn't know No excuses," Charlotte interrupted sharply. "You humiliated my daughter, threatened her, and wielded a weapon in a public space. This is not a matter of misunderstanding. It is a matter of criminal behavior and gross misconduct. Security will escort you from the premises, and authorities have already been alerted. You will answer for your actions." Lawson's pale facade faltered completely. He attempted to rise, to assert dominance one last time, but a subtle nod from the young man in uniform, the one who had intervened, kept him seated. The security officer, professional and precise, stepped forward, his hand lightly on Lawson's elbow. "Sir, I'm going to ask you to come with me. Now," he said, his tone firm and unyielding. Patrons whispered among themselves, the realization spreading like wildfire. Richard Lawson, a man whose reputation had preceded him for years, was being publicly humiliated, not for a trivial mistake, but for cruelty, recklessness, and abuse of power. The sense of justice was palpable, almost electric. Emily exhaled deeply, finally allowing herself a small measure of relief. Her hands, still trembling slightly, relaxed as she watched Lawson being escorted out. The tension that had gripped her chest for hours began to ease, replaced by a growing sense of empowerment. Charlotte turned to her daughter, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Emily," she said softly, a mixture of pride and concern in her voice. "Are you all right?" Emily nodded, though tears pricked at the corners of her eyes. I think so," she whispered. "Thank you for coming, for everything." Her mother smiled warmly. "You didn't need me to save you, Emily. You were prepared, you stayed calm, assessed the danger, and took action. That's true courage, but sometimes even the strongest need allies." Emily swallowed, overwhelmed by a rush of gratitude and relief. "I was so scared," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. He had a weapon, and everyone was just watching. I didn't know if anyone would step in." Charlotte shook her head gently. "That fear doesn't make you weak, it makes you human, and you acted with incredible skill and bravery. You didn't panic, you communicated, you protected yourself, and you relied on your training. You turned a terrifying situation into a triumph." Emily looked around the restaurant. The staff, once tense and fearful, now offered smiles and nods of respect. Patrons whispered in astonishment, some even approaching to compliment her bravery. It was a reversal that felt almost surreal, from humiliation to honor in a matter of minutes. One of the waiters, a young man named Javier, approached with a shy smile. "Emily, that was incredible," he said, his voice filled with awe. "You kept your cool. You saved yourself and probably prevented something worse. I don't even know what to say." Emily gave a small, grateful smile. "Thank you, Javier. I couldn't have done it without everyone paying attention. It was teamwork in a way. I just had to signal." Javier nodded, clearly impressed. "You handled it like a pro. Honestly, I've never seen anything like it." The restaurant manager, Tony, stepped forward, his usual gruff expression softening. "Emily, I don't know how to say this without sounding dramatic, but you were amazing. I've worked in this business for 20 years, and I've never seen someone keep their cool under pressure like that. You're incredible." Emily smiled, a mixture of pride and disbelief washing over her. I was scared, she admitted again, but I just focused, that's all. Focus and thinking ahead. Charlotte Parker stepped closer, her gaze sweeping the room to address everyone present. I want to make one thing clear, she said, her voice firm. Emily's bravery tonight is a lesson for all of us. Kindness, composure, and preparation matter more than arrogance or cruelty, and those who abuse power, like Richard Lawson, will face consequences, always. A murmur of agreement ran through the restaurant. Patrons nodded, some clapping softly, others offering Emily respectful glances. For the first time that evening, Emily felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She had endured humiliation, intimidation, and terror, and emerged not just unharmed, but triumphant. The young man in uniform, whose identity had remained somewhat mysterious until now, approached Emily. He extended a hand, a smile of reassurance on his face. You did the right thing, he said quietly. Your training, your quick thinking, it made all the difference. You were calm, precise, and alert. That's why we were able to intervene safely. Emily shook his hand, her gratitude evident. Thank you, I don't even know how to explain it. It all happened so fast. He nodded. Sometimes the best actions happen in silence. You communicated without words and that saved lives. That's remarkable. Emily's mother stepped in, placing a hand on both of their shoulders. Emily, she said, this is your moment. You faced adversity, remained composed, and proven that courage isn't about strength alone. It's about intelligence, preparation, and integrity. You've made all of us proud. Emily's eyes welled with tears. I want to make sure something like this never happens again. No one should have to feel that scared in their own workplace. Charlotte nodded. And that's why we're going to make changes. Emily, you'll have a voice in every safety protocol, every training program. From now on, kindness, respect, and preparedness will be prioritized, not just for you, but for everyone who works here. Your experience will make this place stronger. Emily smiled through the tears, a mix of relief, pride, and determination settling over her. She realized that tonight she had not just survived, she had made a difference. She had turned fear into action, humiliation into triumph, and danger into a lesson for everyone present. The final act of justice came swiftly. Within minutes, the authorities arrived, quietly escorting Lawson out of the building. The patrons and staff watched in silence as the man who had once seemed untouchable was led away, disarmed and defeated. His weapon was confiscated, and his reputation, at least in this moment, lay in tatters. Emily's mother turned back to her daughter, her expression softening. Emily, are you ready to leave the past behind? She asked. Emily nodded, her voice firm and confident. Yes, I think I finally can. Charlotte smiled warmly. Good, and remember, this isn't the end. It's the beginning. Your courage tonight has shown everyone that true strength comes from character, preparation, and integrity. And that's a lesson no one can take away from you. Emily took a deep breath, letting the words sink in. The terror, the humiliation, and the fear of the evening had transformed into a profound sense of accomplishment. She had faced an almost impossible situation and emerged victorious, not through luck, but through skill, courage, and the support of those who believed in her. The staff gathered around her, offering congratulations, smiles, and words of admiration. Emily realized that her actions had not only ensured her safety, but had inspired everyone in that room. From the waiters to the patrons, the lesson was clear. Cruelty and arrogance cannot overcome preparation, intelligence, and courage. Later, as Emily and her mother left the restaurant together, the night air felt crisp and liberating. The city lights shimmered around them, but Emily no longer felt like a small figure lost in the urban chaos. She felt powerful, not because of wealth or status, but because of her integrity, bravery, and resourcefulness. And for Richard Lawson, the consequences were only beginning. The law, the public eye, and the stark reality of his actions would ensure that his arrogance and cruelty would no longer intimidate anyone. Justice, swift and satisfying, had been served. Emily glanced at her mother, a mixture of relief and gratitude washing over her. I couldn't have done this without you, she said softly. Charlotte shook her head, a faint smile playing on her lips. You did this, Emily. I just helped when I could. The real strength was always yours. Never forget that. As they walked into the night, Emily felt a profound sense of closure. The confrontation, the danger, the humiliation, it was all behind her. And in its place was empowerment, respect, and a renewed understanding of her own strength. Tonight she had not only survived, she had triumphed. 1 year later, the streets of downtown Chicago were alive with the familiar hum of life. Honking cars, hurried commuters, the chatter of cafe patrons spilling onto the sidewalks. But for Emily Parker, the city felt different now. safer, brighter, and brimming with possibilities. She walked with confidence, her steps purposeful, her posture upright. Gone was the quiet anxiety that had once shadowed her every move. In its place was a calm assurance born of courage, resilience, and hard-earned victory. Emily had taken immense strides in the past year. Her night shifts at the restaurant were now a thing of the past. She had transitioned fully into her role at the non-profit, which had expanded under her guidance and her mother's support. She had spearheaded new safety protocols, training programs, and communication systems, ensuring that no employee or client would ever have to experience the fear and intimidation she had faced at Lawson's table. Her colleagues looked up to her, not only for her professionalism, but for her bravery. The story of that night had quietly spread through the organization, inspiring respect and admiration. Yet Emily's greatest transformation wasn't professional, it was personal. She had learned to trust herself, to rely on her instincts, and to recognize the quiet strength that had carried her through life's darkest moments. Every challenge she faced now was met with poise, intelligence, and the confidence that she could handle whatever came her way. Her apartment, once modest and modestly furnished, had grown into a reflection of her new life. Simple elegance, carefully curated books, plants thriving in the sunlight, and a sense of peace she had rarely experienced before. Emily had even begun mentoring younger staff members at the nonprofit, teaching them that courage and preparation could be as vital as skill or education. She often recounted her experience with Lawson, not for dramatics, but as a lesson in integrity, vigilance, and self-respect. One Friday afternoon, Emily was seated at her desk reviewing grant applications when her phone buzzed. It was a message from Josh. "Dinner tonight, want to celebrate?" She smiled. Of course, there was always cause for celebration when life felt this balanced, this full of promise. Later that evening, Emily arrived at a local Italian bistro, one she and Josh had frequented when life was simpler but harder. She spotted her brother waving from a corner table, his school books tucked under his arm, a proud grin on his face. "You look different," Josh said as Emily approached. "Not just older, stronger, happier." Emily laughed softly, sliding into the chair across from him. "I feel different," she admitted. "This past year, it's changed everything, not because the danger is gone, because it isn't, but because I know I can handle it, and I've learned to never underestimate myself." Josh reached across the table, squeezing her hand. "You were amazing, Em. That night, what you did, it could have been terrifying, but you saved yourself, and maybe even more than that." Emily's eyes glistened. "I didn't do it alone," she said. "I had training, I had allies, I had people who believed in me. But the real lesson, the lesson I've never forgot, is that I can survive anything if I trust myself." Meanwhile, the world outside continued to shift for Richard Lawson. News reports had quietly surfaced in the months following the incident, documenting his threats, intimidation, and the weapon incident at the restaurant. Professional circles that once admired his ruthlessness now questioned his character. Clients reconsidered partnerships, colleagues distanced themselves, and even his investors began scrutinizing his behavior. The once arrogant CEO was now a cautionary tale in corporate ethics seminars, a stark reminder that cruelty and intimidation carry consequences. Emily, for her part, followed these developments with a detached sense of satisfaction. She did not gloat. She did not celebrate someone else's downfall. But there was a quiet contentment in knowing that justice had been served, that Lawson's arrogance had met a reckoning. The balance had shifted, and her courage had been validated. At the nonprofit, Emily now chaired monthly meetings on workplace safety, emergency preparedness, and employee empowerment. Her mother often joined her, offering guidance and encouragement, but Emily had grown into a figure of authority in her own right. The young bar waitress who had noticed her first signals that night was now part of the organization, working in community outreach, and Emily ensured she received recognition for her presence and vigilance. It was a full-circle moment, where one act of bravery and attentiveness rippled outward, influencing countless others. One evening, as Emily closed the office for the day, she paused to reflect. The city lights glittered through the window, and she thought about the path that had brought her here. Fear, humiliation, and danger had once loomed like shadows over her life. But now, those same experiences had forged her into someone stronger, wiser, and more empathetic. She realized that the moments that once threatened to break her had actually become the foundation upon which she built a new life, one of courage, self-respect, and resilience. Emily's story had also left a mark on the broader community. The incident with Lawson became a case study in courage under duress. inspiring workshops, employee training sessions, and public talks on the importance of vigilance, quick thinking, and personal empowerment. Emily had become more than just a survivor. She had become a role model, a symbol of integrity, bravery, and the transformative power of standing one's ground. Her mother, Charlotte, often reminded her, "Emily, remember this, courage isn't about not feeling fear. It's about acting despite it. And integrity isn't about status or wealth, it's about choices. You made the right choices, and that's why you're here today." Emily smiled at her mother's words. "I'll never forget," she said, "and I want to make sure no one else ever feels as powerless as I did that night." It was a promise she carried with her every day. A year later, Emily's life was not just safer, it was fuller. The trauma of that night had been transformed into empowerment. She had learned that preparation, intelligence, and calm under pressure could change the course of events. She had discovered that help often comes from unexpected sources, and that silent communication, whether through gestures, signals, or subtle cues, can save lives. And as for Richard Lawson, he was no longer the untouchable figure he had been. He faced ongoing investigations, social consequences, and the very real loss of professional credibility. The arrogance and cruelty that had defined him were replaced with isolation, scrutiny, and the slow realization that power alone cannot shield one from the consequences of one's actions. Emily Parker, meanwhile, walked confidently into the future, her life transformed not by wealth or luck, but by courage, resourcefulness, and integrity. Her story carried a simple yet profound moral. True strength comes from character, not status. Bravery is not the absence of fear, but the will to act despite it. And integrity will always outlast arrogance. She paused for a moment, looking directly at the camera if someone were watching. Her eyes shone with warmth and quiet determination. "Remember," she said softly, "it's not about how others see you, it's about how you see yourself. Stand tall, stay true, and never underestimate the power of courage and kindness." And with that, she smiled. If Emily's story inspired you, don't keep it to yourself. Like this video, share it with your friends and family, and subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories of courage, resilience, and triumph over adversity. Because sometimes the bravest acts happen in silence, and sometimes those acts change everything.